Ace Frehley was born in the Bronx, New York in 1951. He grew up in a working-class family and found his identity through the guitar. By the early 1970s, he was playing small clubs around New York and working odd jobs to support himself. In 1973, he answered an advertisement placed by two musicians who were forming a new band. The musicians were Paul Stanley and Simmons. The band was called Kiss. The audition was not smooth. Ace showed up wearing mismatched sneakers and began playing while the band was still auditioning another guitarist. But when he played, something clicked. He had a raw blues-based energy that Stanley and Simmons recognized as exactly what they needed. They hired him. Peter Criss joined on drums shortly after, and the original lineup was complete. The early years were difficult. Kiss played small clubs for small crowds. The makeup and costumes that would later define the band were initially an attempt to stand out in a crowded New York music scene. For several years, the band barely survived. Their first 3 albums sold at modest levels, though they helped build a dedicated fan base. In 1975, the live album Alive captured the energy of their theatrical stage show and became a major hit. Kiss became one of the biggest bands in America. Ace Frehley became a rock star. For a young man who had grown up with very little, the sudden wealth and fame were overwhelming. By his own account, Ace began drinking heavily and using drugs. For several years, he managed to balance his lifestyle with his musical output. Kiss continued to release successful albums and sell out arenas. But by the late 1970s, the balance was shifting. Ace has acknowledged that his reliability was becoming a problem. He missed recording sessions. He showed up late for performances. His relationships with Paul Stanley and Simmons were becoming strained. In 1978, each of the 4 Kiss members released a solo album on the same day. It was a marketing gamble that allowed each member to express their individual musical identity. Peter Criss released a collection of ballads that did not sell well. Simmons released a theatrical album with guest appearances from well-known musicians, but it also underperformed commercially. Paul Stanley's album was solid, but not exceptional. Ace Frehley's album was different. It was a straightforward hard rock record that connected with audiences. The single New York Groove reached number 13 on the Billboard Hot 100, the highest charting position of any of the solo Kiss projects. The album sold well and received positive reviews. According to Ace, the success of his solo album made him realize he was more creative away from the other members than he was around them. He has described this as a realization that stayed with him and grew over the following years. By 1979, Kiss was moving in a direction that Ace later said he did not agree with. The band released Dynasty, an album that leaned heavily into pop and disco. Ace has described himself as a blues-based rock guitarist who had joined Kiss to play hard rock. The polished commercial sound of songs like I Was Made for Loving You felt distant from what he wanted to play. The album was a commercial success, but according to Ace, he felt the band was losing its musical identity. The tension between him and the rest of the band continued to grow. In 1980, Peter Criss left Kiss. His relationship with Stanley and Simmons had deteriorated, and according to the band's account, his own struggles with substance abuse had made him an unreliable member. He was replaced by Eric Carr, a drummer from Brooklyn, who adopted the persona of the Fox. According to Ace, he watched Peter leave and recognized elements of his own situation in what had happened. With Peter out of the band, Ace has described feeling increasingly isolated inside Kiss. Kiss released Unmasked in 1980, another pop-oriented album. According to Ace, he was drinking heavily at this point, and his substance abuse was escalating. He has also described developing a dependence on prescription medications. His behavior was becoming more erratic. His relationship with Stanley and Simmons was approaching a critical point. In February 1981, Kiss released Music from the Elder. It was a concept album intended as a soundtrack for a film that was never made. The album featured orchestral arrangements and fantasy themes, a sharp departure from the hard rock sound that had defined the band. The album was poorly received by many fans and sold less than the band's previous records. According to Ace, he had hoped the band would return to a heavier sound after the pop experiments of Dynasty and Unmasked. Instead, they had made a progressive concept album that had little connection to the music he wanted to play. He has described himself as deeply frustrated by this. The album has since gained a following among some listeners who appreciate its ambition, but at the time, according to Ace, it left him feeling that the band had permanently moved away from his own musical instincts. By late 1981, according to Ace Frehley, he had made an internal decision. He wanted to leave Kiss. He has said that he did not announce it publicly at first, and that the formal process had not yet begun. He continued to participate in the band's activities, but according to his account, he had resolved that his time with the band was coming to an end. He has described a meeting in which Paul Stanley came to his house in Connecticut and took him out to lunch. According to Ace, Paul asked him not to leave and tried to change his mind. According to Ace, he told Paul that he was leaving. Paul Stanley and Gene Simmons have given different accounts of the departure over the years, stating that Ace was fired due to his unreliability. The two sides have maintained different versions of how the departure occurred. What is not disputed is that Ace Frehley was actively considering leaving the band during this period, and that tensions within the group were high. The factors behind Ace's decision, according to his own statements in multiple interviews, were several. He has said plainly that he quit because he started abusing substances and alcohol. He has described himself during this period as someone who was drinking heavily, using prescription medications, and whose health was declining. He has said that he felt he was on a collision course with disaster. According to Ace, another factor was creative. He has said he did not agree with the direction of the band. He wanted to play guitar-driven hard rock, and Kiss was making pop records and concept albums. He has described feeling that his musical voice was being suppressed and that Paul and Gene made the important decisions without meaningful input from him. He has referred to them in interviews as control freaks and said he was more creative working away from them. There was also a personal dimension to his state of mind. In a 2018 interview, Ace described having thoughts about driving his car into a tree on the way home to Connecticut during his final months with Kiss. He said he told his lawyer about a contract the band had signed and mentioned that every night he wanted to drive into a tree because he was not happy. This account comes directly from Ace himself and represents his own recollection of his emotional state at the time. It is a striking window into how he has described feeling. In April 1982, Ace Frehley was involved in a serious car accident. The accident had lasting effects on his health. According to available accounts, he was prescribed painkillers for his injuries, and his dependence on prescription medication increased significantly. The accident compounded his existing problems with alcohol. By the time Kiss entered the studio in 1982 to record their 10th album, Creatures of the Night, Ace did not participate in the recording sessions. The recording process took place over several months, and Ace was absent throughout. The band worked largely as a trio in the studio. Other guitarists were brought in to play on the album. Vinnie Vincent, a songwriter and guitarist who had been introduced to the band by a mutual contact, played lead guitar on multiple tracks and co-wrote songs. Steve Ferris from the band Mr. Mister played the guitar solo on the title track. Robin Ford, a respected session guitarist, played on I Still Love You and Rock and Roll Hell. According to the album's documented credits, Ace's involvement in the recording process was minimal. His image appeared on the album cover for contractual and promotional reasons, but his musical contribution to the record was limited. Creatures of the Night was released in October 1982. The album cover featured Ace in full makeup alongside Paul Stanley, Gene Simmons, and Eric Carr. According to published accounts, the decision to keep his image on the cover was made for contractual and commercial reasons. Ace was still technically a member of the band under contract. He agreed to continue doing promotional appearances, and he participated in a European promotional tour in late 1982. He was still wearing the spaceman makeup and appearing on stage. But according to those close to the situation, he was already finished with the band in practical terms. The album itself represented a return to a heavier sound. Creatures of the Night was darker and more aggressive than anything Kiss had done since the early 1970s. According to Ace, it was the kind of album he had been asking the band to make, but he was not present for its recording. The album was better received than its immediate predecessors and is now considered one of the stronger records in the Kiss catalog. After the European promotional tour ended in late 1982, Ace Frehley departed Kiss. He was replaced by Vinnie Vincent, who adopted a new makeup design created by Paul Stanley. Vincent remained with the band for 2 albums before being replaced himself. The original lineup of Kiss, the 4 musicians who had founded the band in 1973, would not perform together again until the MTV Unplugged reunion in 1995. After leaving Kiss, Ace formed his own band, Frehleys Comet. He released 2 albums with the group and later pursued a solo career. He has said in interviews that leaving Kiss was the right decision for him. The years that followed were difficult. According to his own account, his substance abuse continued to be a serious problem through the 1980s and early 1990s. He has described having legal troubles, going through rehabilitation programs, and having near-death experiences. He eventually achieved sobriety and maintained it. In 1996, Ace rejoined Kiss for a reunion tour with Paul Stanley, Gene Simmons, and Peter Criss. The tour was one of the most commercially successful concert tours of the decade. Ace left the band again in 2002. According to Ace, he quit. According to Paul Stanley and Gene Simmons, he was fired. As with the 1982 departure, the 2 sides maintain different versions of events. The question of whether Ace Frehley quit or was fired in 1982 remains a point of disagreement between the parties involved. Ace has stated in multiple interviews that he made the decision to leave and that he informed the band of his decision. Paul Stanley and Gene Simmons have stated in interviews that Ace was fired due to his unreliability and his substance abuse problems. According to Ace, Paul Stanley came to his house and made a personal appeal for him to stay. But the exact sequence of events and the final conversation that sealed Ace's departure are remembered differently by the people who were there. What is known is that Ace Frehley stopped performing with Kiss at the end of 1982 and was replaced by a new guitarist for the band's subsequent activities. The impact of Ace Frehley's departure on Kiss was significant. The chemistry of the original 4 members was never fully recreated. The band continued to record and tour for 4 more decades, but the dynamic was permanently different. Ace Frehley left behind a musical legacy that extended well beyond his time in Kiss. His guitar playing on songs like Detroit Rock City, Rock and Roll All Night, and Cold Gin helped define the sound of 1970s hard rock. His solo on Shock Me, a song he wrote about being electrocuted on stage during a 1976 concert, is widely recognized as one of the most memorable guitar solos in rock. His 1978 solo album is still regarded as a significant work, and New York Groove continues to be played on classic rock radio. He influenced a generation of guitarists who followed him, including musicians who would go on to form some of the biggest rock bands of the 1990s. The story of Ace Frehley's departure from Kiss also illustrates the pressures that come with sustained success in the music industry. The constant touring, the expectations of record labels and fans, the internal politics of a band with 4 strong personalities all contributed to the environment that led to his exit. It is a case study in how commercial success does not automatically translate into personal fulfillment, and how creative differences can pull a band apart even when the financial rewards are substantial. Ace Frehley did not walk away from everything. He walked away from a specific situation that had become untenable for him. According to his own account, he gained creative freedom and the space to address his personal struggles on his own terms. The decision was not a simple trade of money for integrity. It was a complex choice made by a musician who was dealing with addiction, creative frustration, and unhappiness, and who decided that he could not continue the way he was going. The years that followed were not easy. By his own account, Ace struggled and nearly lost everything multiple times, but he also kept making music, kept performing, and eventually reached a point where he could look back at his decision and say that it was the right one for him. His departure from Kiss in 1982 was not a single dramatic moment. It was the end of a long process that involved personal struggles, creative disagreements, and a growing recognition that he could not continue the way he was going. The decision had financial consequences, but it also allowed him to continue working as a musician on his own terms. This is the story behind one of the most discussed exits in rock history. It is not a story of a hero sacrificing everything for artistic purity, nor is it a story of a guitarist who could not handle success. It is the story of a musician who recognized that he was on a destructive path and made a change. The results were mixed. Some things worked out, some things did not, but he kept going. If you value documentaries that present the full complexity of the artists and the decisions they made, consider subscribing to this channel. The goal is always to present what is known and what is documented, rather than what makes the most dramatic story. There are more stories like this one waiting to be told. Subscribe and stay with us as we continue to explore the real history behind the music that shaped generations.